Welcome back to CrimsonCast. Thanks to our friend Hoosier Films for that graphic at the beginning of the show there. He's been cranking those out for us for the last month and a half unsolicited, and it's been delightful. Love the Peach Bowl one probably as much as any of them. But, Scott, it's a snowy Sunday in Indiana. I don't know how things are up in Westfield land, but I can tell you down here in Bloomington, we're dealing with you ain't going nowhere conditions.
We're in the same boat. We got like 8 or 9 inches. We're also dealing here in CrimsonCast North Studios of dealing with a 13-year-old boy. It's like, hey, why don't you wear a jacket and boots when you go out and shovel? And he's like, no, I know better. It's like, okay.
Well, there you go. The capriciousness of youth, right? Yeah, the kids are having a great time with it, though. Like, it's alternating. Let's go out, and it's really powdery snow.
Yeah.
So let's go throw it up in the air, like LeBron James with talc powder, and then come inside and take a shower and get warmed up. It's a simple existence. I love it. Anyway, it's good to talk to you folks again. We promised we were going to have more podcast content. I've been kind of down for the count. The illness I kept trying to not have happen during football season waited until immediately after football season.
Which is great. Take it. Like that's when to have it.
I'm not complaining. I was excusing myself to the audience, who I think are expecting 2 podcasts a day at this point, and I don't blame them. So anyway, we're going to talk about
the stampede to Kroger.
Stampede to Kroger. I like that. Yeah,
just every day.
Stampede to CVS, right? It's we got some new stuff to talk about, but we've also got some larger picture issues we wanted to dive into on this episode, and so we'll do that in just a second. But first, just a reminder, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. Scott, I often say Home Field's outdone themselves, but man, they've outdone themselves with the Indiana Championship apparel collection.
Yeah,
it's I don't know what we did to deserve such cool merch, stuff that we're going to have to remember this for the rest of our lives. I mean, if you haven't seen the jacket, the leather jacket, the bomber jacket, I mean, just an incredible design here. Showing off.
I got to say, you and I are both like personal friends with Connor, which is also a joy. So I was not at the celebration yesterday. I watched it on TV. I saw you were there. We'll talk about it, I'm sure. President Pam Whitten was wearing that exact jacket. And I texted Connor. I was like, oh, so I see what I need to do to get past the pre-order line, just become president of the university.
Something tells me just elect Scott trustee and all will be taken care of. You'll get as many jackets as you want. But some other awesome stuff. I mean, the CFP, the national champion trucker hat. There's a quarter zip, which right now is sold out, but I'm sure they'll restock it. There's several awesome T-shirts. There's one in particular which I really have enjoyed.
That's the hoodie I got right there.
I got that same hoodie, that undefeated champs hoodie.
Yeah,
they've got it in a crew neck as well.
And the 16-win Indiana, like that's just a chef's kiss. Like that's to the real Home Field aficionados.
But I do want to note this particular T-shirt, the national champs Bison Crown T-shirt. Just a great design on the beach with the 2 helmets. Great way to remember Indiana winning the national championship in Miami Gardens. You can order off a Home Field Apparel at any time. Go to homefieldapparel.com. Use the code HOME23. Get 15% off your first order. And
they're in what world you're living in. If you haven't made an order yet, now you get to make your first order. Like, just go sick, folks.
If you're new, we'd love to have you ordering Home Field Apparel. Yeah. Great stuff as always. So thank you to Connor, the whole design staff, and everybody involved there. And also thanks to them for their partnership with us as we did several amazing events at the various CFP sites throughout the course of the playoff run. Also, just a reminder, we're brought to you by Posh Hotel Bloomington, the finest in luxury accommodations in the city of Bloomington, located conveniently on Kirkwood Avenue, where Washington crosses it. Great views of both downtown and campus and amazing amenities throughout the building. Go to poshhotelbloomington.com. Check them out on Instagram. Be sure to book for your next Bloomington excursion. Don't settle for second best. Go to Posh Hotel in Bloomington. All right, Scott, lots of things. Let's start with the event that happened yesterday.
Okay.
Indiana doing a championship celebration. When you live in the Midwest, sometimes the dealer of the weather cards just has it out for you. And
Right.
man, that was the case with this one. It was very cold. I went out to the upstairs pub with our friends, and we partied a little bit beforehand. We all got in the cars, bundled up, drove over, and the stadium was not full, but there were, I'd say, a solid 25-30,000 people there, which is a lot for an event that you had to drive a long way to, unless you lived in Bloomington, where the temperature was that cold and where there was an impending winter storm coming. And it was cool to see the guys. It was cool to hear from Cignetti and from Scott Dolson and the rest of the crew. It was a great kind of punctuation mark on the season, and I'm glad they did it. It would have been nice if it had been warmer, or if there had been maybe some way to do it a little more contained. But I think given the materials they had to work with, it was a really cool thing to see.
No, look, I did not. We were debating going down, but with the kids and the weather and the storm, we just decided not to. And watched it on TV, and it was fun on TV. It was warm in my living room. I will say, as a season ticket holder, I got a couple emails about that, and they the varsity club did a good job of kind of explaining why they were keeping it where it was and moving forward. They were in a really tough position where it's like there isn't a lot of inside buildings in Bloomington that could hold the number of people that were expected. And even if you do Assembly Hall, it's like you might have people waiting outside to get in for as long as possible. And then the idea of postponing it, they said, we if we postpone it, a lot of the players you want to hear from may not be here anymore. Like, this is kind of the last moment when they're all there. So I'm happy. It was awesome to watch. I do think this kind of codifies a minor thing that we've been discussing for a while. Like, what is the song? Maybe what is that, between third and fourth quarter moment? Like, it feels like Mellencamp's Hurt So Good has kind of become that song now, with Mellencamp getting up and singing it and getting some of the players to come up and sing it. It was awesome. No, it was fantastic. And I joke in jest, the only thing that could have made it better, and by the way, this is not a push one way or the other. I want all young players to make their own decisions and the best decisions for them. But yesterday would have been awesome for Omar Cooper to be like, and by the way, I'm coming back. But you can't have all cherries on top of the cake. It was awesome. And I really enjoyed the picture of all of the trophies that we got this year.
Yeah.
And I will be the first to say, they're sitting there going through the trophy list, and there's the one national champion trophy that's like shaped like a bowl, like a stadium bowl. And my wife's like, do they give that out every year? I'm like, this is unknown territory. I don't normally watch.
Yes,
I didn't realize there was that. Forgive me. I didn't realize they still gave out the glass football trophy. So it's like, oh, there's 2 extra trophies I didn't know about. And I'm like, and my son's like, so Dad, do they owe it? I'm like, we're in uncharted territory. We've gone 88 miles an hour. We're into a different realm. Like, I don't know how these things work.
No, it's true. It's like we finally passed our initiation ritual, and we're allowed to see what happens in like the wood paneled room in the basement.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like asking somebody, like, what happens in a what's not Friars Club, but what's the Freemasons? Freemasons. Yes. Freemasons Club. Like, I don't know. I've never been there. Yeah. Now we know.
What is that tattoo you have now? Yes. No, it's
Alabama has 18 of those. What?
Right. Yeah. No, it is. I thought about that a little bit as we were going through the ceremony, and I love the quip from Cignetti about winning a new trophy case.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's true.
I'm shocked nobody said, wait, you need a trophy case.
Right.
Or, but I'm joking, obviously. But no, this is a whole new strata for IU football. And look, it's important that you have these moments. And I know for the people who were like, move it inside to Assembly Hall, I think there's a real psychological thing about not putting the football celebration in Assembly Hall. It needs to be in Memorial Stadium, and weather be damned and circumstances not ideal, but this is what you should do. And so I'm glad that they made that decision. And I think ultimately it'll be even better next year when the weather's slightly better and we're doing this all over again.
Yep. I agree.
But it does end up kind of putting almost a punctuation mark on the season. There's still a couple of pieces of business that we're waiting on from a roster perspective. You mentioned Omar Cooper Jr., and we just don't know yet. Now, the portal deadline has already passed, but there's like a 48-hour waiting period, and it's possible that by the time this gets released or that you're listening to it, we may know what's going on with Omar Cooper Jr. Obviously, I would love to see him back selfishly. I also I've seen him mock drafted in the second or third round in some things that I've seen. I don't know if his stock could ever get any higher as a receiver. It's an interesting calculus that I think a lot of players now are going through that are not surefire first round picks or are still in that mode where they have a little bit more time due to how old they are or how not old they are. I mean, the younger, the better. Where if you think about the amount of money you're going to make in 1 year playing maybe a maximum of 16 games, which is what Indiana played last year, versus the uncertainty of getting drafted. Like you get a signing bonus, but unless you're a first round draft pick, that's normally not an immense amount of money. And you could get that next year if you stuck around for another year. You have less wear and tear on your body, and you have a guaranteed contract essentially. And I do think that with some of the guys that are on, Carter Smith announced yesterday, or I think it was either yesterday or the day before, that he's definitely coming back. Tyreek Tucker, who I don't know if I'd seen him mocked necessarily in drafts, but he announces he's coming back. Mario Landino had to come back. I don't think he was actually eligible to get drafted, but I think you'll see this with some players around the country where they're looking at the math and they're looking at the numbers and they say to themselves, well, I could earn $1 million and a half perhaps staying in school. And, going to the NFL, the salary range for like a third round draft pick is generally, if you make the active roster, like you have to have 3 years of service to earn a minimum of $1.1 million in a season. And if you're a practice squad player, which I think a lot of these guys might end up being, you're earning $234,000 over the course of an 18-week season. Now, that does mean you're in the NFL ecosystem, but when you consider that the whole NFL salary structure is essentially biased towards players that have already hit their free agent contract in year 4, when you consider how hard it is to latch on to an NFL roster. I mean, we've seen guys drafted in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round not make the roster of the team that drafts them. It's a lot more of a sure thing if someone's going to offer you close to $1 million or over $1 million because you have value to that team and say, yeah, I'll run it back. Why not? I get paid that money. I can put that money in the bank, and then I'm still going to probably be in great shape for playing in the NFL the following year.
Agreed. The other thing that you've mentioned, which I'll kind of touch on, is that, there's also like just what the average career length in the NFL is. It's like 2.5 years or 2.7. I will say, to me, there's a caveat there. I don't know where the break point is, but I'm pretty sure, if you look at the average career length based on draft status, it's much different. Like if you're a first or a second rounder, most of those guys have a longer career length, and the average of a first round pick is normally to have a long enough career to make at least a pension, 5 or 6 years to get to the pension level, to get to your second contract. So there's a calculus there these guys are going to have to figure out where, if you're, and I have no idea, but if you're Omar Cooper Jr. and you're mocked like, just for sake of argument, like mid to high second round, it's like, all right, at that point, you're probably, most guys' average career is past the long, the average, and you're probably going to look at getting a second contract just based on being drafted there, and you kind of meet potential. It makes sense to go. But I think, under 3rd round is kind of, it feels like a breaking point in the NFL where you may not latch on with a team. You might be under that, career length, and, why not go for that extra year? But these are all calculuses, that players are going to have to make. And this is, it's something you and I have joked about. Not that, we've kind of skipped over the idea of like, it would be great to have a coach so good that he gets hired somewhere else. Like we're at a point where we have that coach, but he's not going to get hired somewhere else for a variety of reasons. But once you get to this level of program and this level of player, and you're winning national championships in an undefeated manner, you're going to have to deal with a lot of guys with NFL choices. And these are good problems to have.
You mentioned career length based upon round drafted. It's a pretty linear progression. The average first round draft pick has a career that lasts 3.7 seasons. Second round, it's 3.3 seasons. Third round, it's 2.8. Fourth round, it's 2.6, all the way down to the 7th round where it's 1.6. And so, again, if you have the opportunity to come back, there are now some financial incentives to do so. And it makes it for some interesting processes at this time when guys are essentially having to make a big decision life-wise, but teams are as well. And this is where the other end of it comes in. If you're Indiana, you've got to make decisions about, okay, what recruits are going to bring in and what am I going to pay them? Who am I getting out of the portal? We already know that with some of the players Indiana's brought in. But then you might make a retention offer to a player, but that is not you have a time limit on the amount of time that retention offer can be valid before you got to say, we got to move on because we got to plan the roster. Because, of course, as most of you know, unlike last year, there is no second transfer portal. Like last year, you got through spring ball, you had a transfer portal window in late April, early May. And so you had a bunch of additional movement. That's where Indiana got Jonathan Brady out of that last year from Cal. And they needed that replacement because of the injury that was suffered by Tyler Morris in spring ball. You won't have that this year.
Right.
And so I'm very curious what happens. And I guess I would lean towards the idea that perhaps Cooper is going pro, given that we didn't see an announcement. But I could be wrong. He could be waiting to make the announcement. It's just interesting that it didn't happen at the ceremony, like you said. So we'll see. Either way, I think Indiana's going to be in really good shape at receiver. But, man, I salivate over the idea of Nick Marsh, Omar Cooper, Charlie Becker, that whole group, just those three. I mean, talk about the best receiving room, arguably in the Big Ten. Maybe Ohio State is up there, and certainly they would have the best overall receiver. But it is really intriguing what you would do, and you bring in a guy like Josh Hoover, and that's who you got to throw to throughout the course of the year. That's exciting from an offensive perspective.
No, I'm with you. Selfishly, I would love to have him back because I think it would be amazing. But again, this is where I trust that he and his team are going to do what's best for him. You are right. Like this is where it's so hard in college to kind of build these rosters when everything is movable. At least in the pros, you have locked in contracts. Like, all right, we know we have this player for 5 years and that's a stable thing. You're building all this on sand. As you're saying that, it kind of made me, this would make zero rational sense, but it would be kind of a fun one-day trick if Fernando Mendoza was like, hey, coach, I'm coming back. Because, we have Hoover. Like, are you sure you want to come back, Fernando? It's like, no, man, I'm coming back. Like, just give me one more year. Let's run it back. Because it's like, you've kind of already assumed, but that's happening at every position where, coaches have to kind of assume, all right, this guy is probably going to leave. This guy's probably going to go. And even if you don't have that conversation, we have to start backfilling for that. And then you probably can get in spots where, but it just would be funny if Fernando was like, no, I want to come back. Like, Hoover, are you cool being a backup for a year? Is that why you came here? The other thing, just the other tangents on my mind is very similarly to the Pacers this year. And that's partially because it went to the finals and went to a game 7. But after that game 7, I was decompressing and I'm like, holy shoot, man, like the draft is in 4 days. This is really, and I realized it's because I'm normally done in April, like normally April or May. And there's normally a month and a half. The idea that on Tuesday we're getting the full schedule release by the Big Ten, I was just like, man, that is really soon. But it's like, oh yeah, because normally I'm kind of done in December and you have a month and a half where it's like, man, I'm excited for more football news. And I'm almost like, can we wait and do that in March? I need a month to kind of just decompress. But I realize most everyone else has already had that month of decompressing off of college football.
I know I've been trying to put my life back together ever since I got back from the national championship game and just got to get my head wrapped around where everything is. And you're right. Like normally I'm just kind of twiddling my thumbs at this point. Like, okay, can these guys please stop playing? Can we please just kind of get on to the off season? And then you realize you're the reason everybody's waiting. And my very selfish response to that is you guys can wait a little bit longer. Thank you. So I get it, Georgia fans or Ohio State fans. Finally, I guess I understand. It's fun though. I will say we're going to talk more about roster composition. We had somebody ask on Twitter, like, when are you going to do a breakdown of next year's roster? And I was like, let's let the portal completely play out. I think there's going to be maybe some more signings. Indiana did very, very well, very well in the portal. And you add that to the guys they've got coming back. And this is a really exciting program to be rooting for right now. And I feel like almost uncharted territory because, again, with so many teams, when they win the title, they lose huge pieces of their roster, and Indiana is. Let's not miss the point. I mean, you're losing Aiden Fisher, you're losing Mikhail Kamara, you're losing Elijah Surratt, you're losing Fernando Mendoza, you're losing Roman Hemby, you're losing Kalon Black. I mean, there's a lot of key pieces. D'Angelo Pons is gone. A lot of key pieces that aren't going to be here. But when you think about how we were thinking about the roster going into last year, I don't know. Obviously several of those players we were excited about, but the leap they took from the end of 24 to the end of 25, I'm really excited about what the existing players can do in terms of the leap that they make. And then this coaching staff's done such a great job so far over 2 years, 2 separate rosters essentially, of getting those new pieces aligned very quickly with the old pieces and getting the older pieces to mature and take big leaps from one year to the next. So I'll be keeping an eye on what other pieces end up falling into place, but this feels like a really solid foundation. And when you look around the country, between what Indiana's been able to add, what Indiana's been able to retain, and the track record that's already been displayed by this coaching staff, I think Indiana fans can feel really good going into the 2026 season. It doesn't mean that you're going to be guaranteed to go back to the playoff, but you got to really like your chances if you're Indiana right now, given what we're seeing happening with this roster.
Yeah, and based on what the schedule looks like, the thing that I like with where we're at with the roster as it relates to kind of the national consciousness is, one of the things that you and I were fighting a lot during the last 18 months of this run, up until probably like two and a half after the Ohio State win, was this idea of, Indiana just not being taken seriously, people not wanting to legitimize what they did, like immediately, after we lost to Notre Dame, it was like, all right, from a national perspective, like, all right, we're done. Like, we're happy. You guys can go back down to the top, you'll be in the top 25, but you'll be in the 20s. Like, just go back to where you were. Like, that's a fine place. And you and I obviously did not think, you said 10-2, I said 11-1. I think we were both rosy. Like, neither of us had this on our bingo card, but the pieces were there where it's like, you're bringing back most of the same JMU guys, like you're changing quarterback. All of this, to my point, is we joke about kind of breaking through into the back room, but to me, this offseason really legitimizes that I think we've completely broken through from a national perspective, that we're losing a ton. I mean, like everything you mentioned, our defensive leader on the line, in the middle, in the secondary, our quarterback, our one wide receiver and our 2 running backs. Like, you're losing a ton of production, a ton of key pieces, and you're bringing in a lot of other talented players. In most cases, this would be like, well, new quarterback, new system. It's going to take some time. We'll put him at 17. We're being mocked at 1, 2, or 3 in the country, which to me is the national media being like, okay, because that's what Alabama does, or that's what Alabama used to do, where it's just we trust the national media, but we just trust the process. We trust the Alabama brand that you're going to be able to put it together and plug it in. You see it with Miami. They're losing a lot. They're still in the top 5. So to me, one of the biggest things that has happened is the fact that we've, in short order, already entered that level where everyone nationally is kind of like, yeah, I trust what's going on there. Like, and a lot of change. We trust Cignetti's going to do it. And to be preseason top 5, to me, is just like, we've already achieved that level, which is pretty awesome.
Now, with that comes a certain level of caution, because if we didn't trust the pundits before in their projections of things, and I think we spent a lot of time over on Football Weather talking about how wrong preseason projections were. Now, it feels a lot different when you're on the inside of the projections.
Right.
But it's where everybody's going to have flaws. Everybody's going to have some holes in their roster. I think Bill Connolly had a really interesting approach to this in his column, where he was trying to project what the CFP field would be for next year, which is kind of a fruitless exercise given it is 11 months from now. But he started off the section about picking Indiana back to the CFP with, I'm going to try something new where I don't doubt Indiana, where I assume that Indiana might actually be good. And I think this is an interesting shift for a lot of the people in media, where so much of the negative commentary about IU football, so much of they're going to fail, they're going to lose this game, they can't handle this or that can't handle do that, has been because there's been an assumption that Indiana will stumble. And now, confronted with the reality that Indiana never stumbled and went 16-0 and won the national championship, people will almost always now default towards trusting Indiana until they're shown that they can't. And that can be a dangerous game. And that's where, when you talk about rat poison, as Curt Cignetti has talked about, or I think Pat Riley would call it the disease of more. It's something that leaders in sports, coaches and managers, have to constantly guard against when your team is really good, which is, last year's team had a decent amount of grist in the mill to go against because they were picked in the 20s in the AP poll. They were dropped even further down when they struggled, beat Old Dominion by 13 points in the first game of the season. So they got to play that disrespect chip. Well, it's hard to play disrespected when you're top 5 preseason. You're going to be that way all summer. And so for Cignetti and for Brian Haynes and Mike Shanahan and this whole group, how do you combat complacency? And as great as Cignetti has been about figuring out ways to root out complacency and keeping things process-oriented, he had a roster that was really comprised of an amazing group of guys who have an outstanding culture. And you don't always know that that's going to carry over from year to year. You hope that the process of scouting these guys and understanding who they are as people stands up from year to year. And at this point, you give them the benefit of the doubt. But this is where this can be fun. The offseason can be fun because you can assume until you see evidence to the contrary that that's how it's going to be. And that's a nice spot to be in as far as I'm concerned, Scott.
Yep. No, I agree. And I mean, that's going to be, to me, the two things that Cignetti's going to have to navigate is exactly what you said, the rat poison disease of me. How do you keep a chip on a shoulder when you are the chip, so to speak? But the second thing is, how is he going to deal with this roster when you start moving up? You start getting the 4 stars, the 5 stars, you get the more, I don't want to say more talented, but you just get, players like who play like D'Angelo Pons, but are 6'2", and how they've been, told they're great their entire life and they don't have that same fire. How do you do that? I feel good because I look at the prime example of Curtis Rourke to Fernando Mendoza, where Fernando Mendoza just has more physical gifts as a quarterback than Curtis Rourke. But when you upgraded him, you didn't lose like the sense of what Indiana football is and what Curt Cignetti is trying to build. So I feel good about that. I would also say, not at all, you were not saying this, but like I look at what Cignetti's career is winning at every level. And he didn't have complacency at James Madison, where they went 14-2, then 7-1, and then 12-2, and then 8-3. Like they were having high level success at that level. In Division II, CFP, whatever, and they didn't get complacent. They were able to continue going. Now, countering my own argument, winning a national championship at this level is way different. He didn't win any of the championships at James Madison. Had great seasons, but lost in the Division I championship, lost in the semifinal. So you had the ability to keep that chip on your shoulder. As you said, when you are top 5 and you have a national championship, it's way easier to give into that. But like we continue to say, and I think you and I both feel, it's like Cignetti has given none of us a reason not to believe that he can do what needs to be done this next level. And that doesn't mean we're going to win every game. Doesn't mean we're going to go undefeated every season. It just means I feel like we're going to be mentally prepared for whatever's coming through, every season from here on out.
Let's switch gears. I wanted to talk a little bit about some bigger picture stuff. And some of this I think is well known to the IU fan base, but some of it may not be. We may not have talked about it too much, but this was talked about a lot in the National College Football podcast that I have been listening to and watching. Did you know Indiana is the first new national title winner since 1996?
Yep. I did know that. And it was also when we got the aforementioned little bowl stadium trophy. I didn't know. They said something like this has been, I'm going to screw this number up. It's like, this has been awarded every year since 1954 and 27 teams have won this or some number. And my wife's like, what? And I'm like, well, there hasn't been a new champion since 96. Like it's the same. And and then maybe it was 30 teams. Like the number of years don't match the number of teams by a lot. It's the thing with 96 Florida, that was a team that had been knocking on the door for years and was already kind of thought of as like a pseudo big boy at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Florida was a unique case historically. People now think of Florida as being a team that has always been great, and that I mean they had some periods there where they were in the national conversation in the I mean a little bit in the late 50s and then certainly in the 70s heading into the 80s. They had a long stretch there starting in 1980 where they were ranked at some point every year. But Spurrier came in 1990, and it took him, I think, 7 seasons. And prior to that, like they'd had a 12-1 season, they'd had an 11-2 season. They'd been knocking on the door, and then they have that 12-1 year where they win the national title. Interestingly, only won one national title under Steve Spurrier. People remember it as being more of a reign of terror than it actually was.
Yeah,
but it was a new brand, and at the time, you'd had a couple of those in that same period. Florida State had won one, and it I think a couple of years earlier, 1993 maybe or 94. But then we had this long period where you just have had these repeat champions over and over again, and that is
the closest thing you had to new champions was like Clemson, who had been out in the wilderness for a while, or even Georgia, who hadn't won since like 81 or 82. But again, they're not they are repeat champions. They just have long gaps. It would be like IU basketball winning a title now. We're like, oh, they're back.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an amazing testament that of all the teams that have risen up and have been in the national conversation since 1996, I think of Oregon a lot in this case, where Oregon's been knocking on the door to win a national title, but they haven't been able to do it. That Indiana, again, is the team that ends up doing this is truly remarkable stuff. And it both points to the fact that the rules have changed and that you can build teams in different ways now, but it also points to a reality where Indiana just nailed every single thing that they needed to nail to make this happen. And honestly, I think about Florida State in the 80s, hiring Bobby Bowden and remarshaling resources and figuring out how to get more recruits to go to Tallahassee. Florida was kind of in a similar boat in the 80s that they rode that to the title. It's a similar thing here with Indiana. It's interesting to me that people who are not used to or can't get their heads wrapped around Indiana as a title winning team keep looking for ways to poke holes in what Indiana has accomplished. And we'll go through some of those in future podcasts, but it really is a testament to Indiana figuring all this out, hiring a guy who is rightfully being talked about as among the greatest college coaches of all time. When you think about the full totality of what being a college head coach means, it's not just great X's and O's guy. It is logistical master, and it is talent evaluator extraordinaire, and it is developer extraordinaire. We've talked quite a bit about this idea that Indiana broke college football. I think I mentioned it on one of the podcasts, and I've had that conversation with several people, and I've heard different variations of that coming through the different podcasts I listen to or the commentators that focus on this stuff. And when we say Indiana broke college football, my theory on that is essentially that when you look at what Indiana did, they have now demonstrated a completely different pathway than what we assumed was the required pathway to be a national champion or even a national championship contender in college football. You look at the teams that haven't won titles in the last 15 to 20 years that have been knocking on the door. Again, I'll say Oregon, and Oregon's kind of the new money version of this, but they've been new money in college football for almost 20 years. You go back to when their profile really started to rise, and you think about like Joey Harrington being their quarterback and then playing in a couple of national championship games. But you also throw in Penn State, who's been knocking on the door, was one of the 2 odds-on favorites in a lot of people's eyes to go to the national championship game this year. Obviously had a season where they fell way off from what the expectations were. But you were supposed to have that kind of a program where you were knocking on the door constantly, and then eventually the door just opened. Or you were a team like, say, Auburn, who would put together an amazing season behind a singular player like a Cam Newton, and then that produced this. This, not only was it it wasn't as out of the blue as people are treating it, given what Indiana did last year. But the way that the build happened is so out of the blue that that's where the breaking of college football happened.
Yeah, no, it's a couple. First off, like I've listened to a lot of national stuff too, and people trying to be like, well, let's find this year's Indiana, and like they're well, let's look at like Vanderbilt, and it's like and again, looking back as like Indiana was in the CFP last year, like you would have to look at like Texas Tech, but still we comported ourselves better than Texas Tech in the CFP. Anyway, no, I agree with all that. What I think is really cool is not only those things, but that we're doing it at the time that we're doing it, where you mentioned like Florida State in the 90s, Miami, the U in the 80s. They Florida State and Miami kind of became superpowers in a great time when it felt like the sport was allowed to open up and money was coming in. Like it was just right in that moment where I think a lot of people today would be shocked to be like what Florida State or Miami University, the U, looked like in like 1972. It's like, just wow, it was not like that. It feels like we're going through a seismic shift now in college athletics. And the fact that we just punched through here is awesome. I was listening to, highly recommend the On 3 podcast with Ari and Andy, or Andy and Ari. But they were kind of doing this thought experiment, which really got me thinking, and maybe you and I could save this for another pod, but it was just like, they're not talking about what it would be or what the numbers are, but like if there is a super league in college football, like if you end up having the super conference, who's in it? And they were just like, did Indiana just punch their ticket for them?
Well,
and then like, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, like, did Indiana punch ticket? And they both kind of like, yes. And then it's like, they're kind of looking at other schools. Like they were bringing up, Virginia Tech as like, it has all the stuff, but probably not. And it's like, a lot of people might be pissed if you played that game at where people are or not. But, it does feel like we are in a shifting time. Maybe there is a super conference coming, but the fact that Indiana did this and did it now and unequivocally punched their ticket to whatever that upper echelon is just unbelievably huge and sets us up in a great position for the next 30, 40 years, which is unbelievable. Because I always think about Zach Osterman being like, football is a battleship and it takes forever to turn around. And he's right. But somehow, Cignetti was able to put the oar in the back of the aircraft carrier and get it completely turned around.
Well, but that is, to me, an encapsulation of the breaking of college football that's happened. Because I think Zach was right that college football is a battleship that takes forever to turn around. I don't know that he's right anymore. I think what Indiana has done has illustrated that it's not like that. That doesn't have to be. Now, this is where Indiana, I think, has broken college football even more, which is, they did all of this in 2 years. And yes, there were tremendous financial resources that were applied behind the scenes, but Indiana wasn't going out and spending insane amounts of money on the top players in the portal. I want to call something up, actually, Scott. I was getting a little bit annoyed the other night about the way that some people, not a whole lot of people, but some people have been talking about Indiana and trying to ridicule or lessen the impact of what they did. And let me find this real quick, because I think it's worth talking through as I clumsily try to find.
No, you're good. You're good. No, I mean, I'll talk for 1 second. The money thing I do think is funny, that now a lot of the SEC schools are like, well, it's not really fair. They have a huge alumni base and they have all this money. And it's like, oh, so you're admitting that you had a different way of doing it. Now that the rules are a little more open, it's like, now it's unfair.
No, totally. It's very much rules for me, but not for me when it comes to a lot of these SEC.
Heads I win, tails you lose.
But look at this. So when people talk about, Indiana bought a title or whatever, or try to attribute it to that, these are the portal ratings of players that Indiana signed over the last 2 years that were key contributors, and some of them were not key contributors. And I mean, Fernando Mendoza was no question a sought-after player in the portal, but he was still only the 4th ranked quarterback in the portal, according to 24/7. People liked Holden Stays, who didn't play that much this year. He was a highly rated member of the portal. Marion Knighton was very highly regarded. He barely played this year. Indiana did all of this in 2 years with a group of players that, just looking at their rankings, if the idea is, oh, they went out and bought a team, it's like, this is the team they bought. You would have looked at that receipt if that had been what somebody had purchased for you and said, I don't know, I don't think this is going to get it done. Well, and it absolutely got it done. So my point is, and we'll come back to that slide. I want to go through those ratings more granularly on a future podcast. But what Indiana did was threw the door open on the idea that you could assemble a roster and develop a roster in a completely different manner than what we have always been told is the way you have to win in college football, which is stack recruiting class on recruiting class on recruiting class. And you think about the commentary after last year for Indiana, which is, well, they've won, but it really didn't affect their recruiting class ranking that much. And then you look at the recruiting that was happening before the playoff run started. It's like, well, it's better. It's like close to being a top 25 class, but people saying, well, this is not sustainable. Then you go out and win the flipping title with that collection of players, and that fractures the attitude that you would have to have in college football, where you say you have to do it this way with the recruits. Now you can do it this other way, and now you can also get the recruits. There's this whole calculus that I think it's like opening up a new math book that you've never been exposed to before. And I think for a lot of the college football observer class, they can't get their heads wrapped around this because they are so set on the way that it has been done. The battleship metaphor has always applied. You're talking about this is like a patrol boat, like doing a quick U-turn in the harbor. It shouldn't have been allowed, or not allowed. It shouldn't have been possible to do it this way, yet it's been done this way. What does that mean? And the last part of this, and then I'll throw it back to you, Scott. The funny thing is people will look at this and say, well, that's how we got to do it. And they'll go and get a bunch of players in the portal. And yet you look at the players that Cignetti brought in, and then you look at what he and his coaching staff did to develop them. Those are the things, the evaluation that Cignetti has and the development that IU has right now that cannot be adequately repeated by anybody else that we've seen right now in college football. That's a break point that I don't think people have fully reconciled with.
No, you're hearing it all the time. Like, all right, well, how do we do what Indiana did? It's like, well, you need to have a singularly great coach. Like that's part of the calculus here. It's just not just, oh, we're going to go find under recruited players and plug them into our system. It's like, part of this is, Aiden Fisher became the player he was because of Aiden Fisher working his tail off, but also because of the coaching staff getting him prepared and putting him in the right mindset. Those two things are not. It's not just that Cignetti found a bunch of guys who were like under recruited and were really good and then just rolled the ball out. Like part of it was what he did. The other thing that I find funny along those same lines is the argument of like, oh, Indiana just has a bunch of old players. Like they just got a bunch of old guys. And it's like, all right, well, the numbers you see sometimes don't really reflect like who is playing and who is starting. But it's like, no question. Cignetti has a plan and it's, production over potential. He's doing that. But similarly to the money thing that I think is funny is, just 24 months ago when Cignetti came, all of those players were theoretically available to everybody in college football. And nobody was offering, Elijah Surratt anything at the Power 4 level. Elijah Surratt. Keep messing. I'll get it right. Now he's gone. But like D'Angelo Pons, like all the guys, Mikhail Kamara, all the guys he brought over from JMU. It wasn't like, oh my God, he's porting over expensive players who are old. It was really, the hell is he doing? Those aren't Big Ten players. Like those are group of 5 players. You can't bring that many guys over. This was all available to anybody.
Yeah.
Or the players theoretically were available to anybody. But again, to your point, you could have ported all these guys to, Rutgers with a random coach. Like, I don't know if it would have happened the same because it's a marriage of coaching and of players. And I do think the other thing that's going to be broken here, and I absolutely love that we are in this position, Cignetti is going to get a ton of people fired. Like if you're LSU with super unrealistic expectations, you think, well, we already have all the best players and we have all of these advantages. You're looking at Lane Kiffin pretty good, like middle of the season. Like, hey, Lane, the hell's going on, man? Like, unless they're undefeated. It's like if Lane loses a game this year, there's going to be a lot of people being like, the hell you doing, man? Like, what's going on? Like, Cignetti did it in 2 years at Indiana. You should be able to do it in 1 year at LSU. That's going to be the real calculus they are thinking in a lot of these other schools that are bringing in players. It's going to be like, well, this needs to be a 1 to 2 year turnaround. And I think we've shown it can be done, but all the pieces need to be right, and you need to have the correct answer at coach. And as we see year in, year out, like it's just, there's not a lot of Cignettis out there. That's like the last thing I'll say. I know you've hit this a bunch of times, is this refrain, but we just got to go find our own Cignetti. It's like, okay, good luck. Like, that's what people would have said. We got to go find our own Bob Knight. It's like, there's just not a lot of them out there. Like, good luck. Keep trying to kiss frogs and turn them into princes.
Yeah. I mean, and look, there's, schematic advantages or training advantages or trade practices are amongst the most fleeting things. When you have an advantage, Bob Knight's a great example. Bob Knight developed in the 70s and implemented, when he got the job at IU, a system that was so effective at melding really efficient offense with defense that made it very hard to score. And then he got the right groups of players that he wins 2 national championships in the first decade that he's at Indiana. Probably should have won a third, maybe should have won a fourth, depending on what happens in the 74 season. And the sport eventually adapted to what he did, but it took a couple years. Like, it was that period in the mid 70s is kind of like, uh-oh, like, what do we do now? And there was a changing of the guard happening then too. John Wooden retires at that point.
Yeah.
And you've got several other coaches that are at the end of their careers. Al McGuire's at the end of his career at that point. Dean Smith's just getting started. I think he'd been there like 7 or 8 years at that point. But my point is, it won't be an advantage that Indiana sustains forever. Just because of Cignetti's age and the fact that he will eventually, as we saw, like Derek Owings is gone. The strength and conditioning coach has gone to Tennessee.
Our coordinators probably have 1 or 2 more years left.
But you take advantage of it while you can, and you also disadvantage people that are desperately trying to catch up to you in the mix, because they are starting with a real deficit of available pieces that work in the new environment. Now, others will figure it out. There'll be new innovative approaches, but it's a great spot for Indiana specifically to be in. And it's got to be terrifying, like you said, to coaches that are out there. And this is where I would look at it from this perspective. This probably sounds overly critical, but I think that there's some justification to this thought process. There's a lot of SEC coaches that have just gotten by on the accrual of talent and the idea that as long as you win your non-conference games and you pull off 2 or 3 wins in the SEC, you can always lean back on the idea that, well, there's just teams that are more talented than us and there's nothing we can do about it. And maybe you have a 1 or 2 year breakthrough and then you settle back in. I don't think that's going to fly anymore, because if you are now being usurped on the national stage 3 years in a row by Big Ten teams have had to innovate. They've had to figure out, how on earth do we get around this stranglehold that SEC schools seem to have on highly rated talent, which is almost always based on the physicals. Now you don't have to go through that door in order to get that talent. And I think all 3 of those teams, Michigan, Ohio State, and now Indiana, have in different ways attacked the problem, and they've all had the same ultimate level of success. And I think you look across the board at the SEC, and the SEC is internally has got to be saying, we have fallen way behind in the arms race, and there may not be an easy way to get back to it, because our coaches generally are not doing a great job of coaching because they're too busy historically having a talent advantage, which means that's really what's winning you a lot of these games.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And it's also interesting hearing them start to just be like, well, there's not, I heard Paul Feinbaum be like, there's only like 2 billionaires in the state of Alabama. Like, I don't know how we're going to compete. It's like, but I do think they are looking up and realizing, never been a fan of the term like sleeping giant, but you just do look at, Big Ten schools they're big and they have large alumni bases, and you look up and suddenly it's like, wow, Indiana has, 800,000 living alumni, but Michigan State's not far behind. Neither is Ohio State. Neither is Penn State. These are huge alumni bases that are being activated in ways that weren't possible 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you suddenly, you look at smaller, the SEC schools like Mississippi State, or just some of those schools that are kind of like, hey, this isn't fair. It's like, sorry, like those are the rules, and like the dynamics have shifted. And it's not going to last forever.
Right.
The SEC will also innovate, and they have a lot of good teams. They'll probably have the number 1 ranked team going into the next year with Texas. But it is, there's definitely some metrics that are changing, and it's also just wild that Indiana just immediately burst through and just kind of took one of those top Big Ten spots. Like that's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. We're going to do a whole episode at some point about how Indiana broke college football. There's about 7 or 8 factors that I think are key to understanding the Indiana breakthrough and key to understanding why this has got to be setting off alarm bells in so many different coaching rooms across the country. And I'm really, as I work through the process of how everything charts out the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be curious to me which of those factors becomes the most important.
Well, and I hope this happens. I think all of us are now very optimistic, and we all have reason to have trust in our system. But it could be the beginning of a larger break, because for all the reasons you laid out, let's fever dream this even further. Indiana goes back to back. What if they go 15-1 next year? God, what if they go 16-0 again? I mean, what if they win another national championship even in 2 years? What if they make the CFP next year and then the year after win the national championship? Like everything you're saying is still there, but it would be even more alarm bells, because that now it's like, you could almost put this into there's a capsule of like, all right, there was a secret sauce with Cignetti and this group of JMU players where he added on a couple extra pieces like Fernando Mendoza. You bring him on, but it's like that was the core. He poured it over a core that was, unique, liked his style. And if, then it's like, all right, this blip can go off the radar. But if you have a success again and you do it another year, whether it's next year or the year after, and you have, even just getting to the CFP semifinal or final, I do think it shows like, oh, this new system is not only working, it's replicatable. It's not just that one group of JMU players. Like, holy crap, there's really, outside of Cignetti's age, there's no reason this won't keep going forever. Or at least, for the next couple of years. And I think that could really set off some alarm bells. Like the back-to-back championship thing, I would love. That would
you
break. I'll take it. I'll take it right now. But that would break. I mean, you talk about people's brains being broken now. That would break people fundamentally.
That's the thing about college football. And again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the trophies. When you think about college football, you think about it working a certain way, and it's worked a certain way for a long time. But then there have been these moments in the history of the game where everything started to change. And so, like, right around the turn of the century, the 20th century, but prior to that, college football was ruled by the Ivy League schools. All of your champions were Yale, Penn, Princeton, Harvard. You'd occasionally have a team like Lafayette that would get thrown in there. But then you get to the turn of the century, and suddenly the public schools are able to use alumni and
who was the Ivy League Paul Feinbaum? We got to find that. Sorry. It's like,
but that's
it just means more in the Ivy.
But like Michigan develops a program at that time, and they start winning titles, and Minnesota does, and Chicago does, and it fundamentally changes the sport. And then you flash forward another 20-some years, and you start to see the forward pass change the sport. You get Notre Dame, a Catholic school, which were largely excluded from things at that time, but they start winning through innovative practices. And I do wonder, when we're sitting around talking about this time period 20, 30 years from now, assuming we're both healthy enough to be talking 30 years from now, I do wonder what we'll look back on this as. Would this be a singular achievement where Indiana came out of the blue and did this, and we look back at it and say, wow, that was a weird year in college football? Or do we look at this as the paradigm shift, where Indiana not only wins additional titles, continues to stay in the national landscape, but starts a revolution where other teams in a similar vein who would not have had the chance to compete before are suddenly competing? That is it's something that is unknowable at this point, but I do like the thought exercise. And what's great is we get to live this history in real time.
Yeah. No, it's the future legitimizes and changes the present. And what I mean by that is, the last year's CFP run for Indiana football is now looked at much differently that they won the national championship this year, which is totally doesn't make a ton of sense logically. But now it's like, holy crap, man. You hear it a lot of like, they've only lost 2 games in 2 years. And, they've only lost to, the 2 teams that were in the title. Like suddenly that run just looks much different, much like the Pacers were a prime example, like making it to the finals legitimized their run the year before. What happens over the next 4 to 5 years is going to change how this season is viewed. And by the way, they're both awesome. Like if Indiana doesn't make the CFP again under Cignetti, it'll probably lean more toward, man, that was a wonderful 2-year run. Like he captured lightning in a bottle with the group and just was never able to recapture. But damn, he had the world by the horns there for 2 years. But if we keep this up, or we go to the CFP again, or we win another natty, or we go to the college football final, we start doing what Oregon kind of has been doing for the last 5 or 6 years and just stay in this spot of high level legitimacy, it will change how this year is viewed. It's like this will be the singular change of when football changed and when it's like, wow, that's how a school changed the paradigm and got in.
Last thing I wanted to hit before we wrap up. I thought about this a lot the day after the title. I'm sitting in Miami Beach I went to a Neapolitan pizza place, which you can't get in Indiana, unfortunately. Delightful pizza. It was great. I loved it. Had a Negroni. And I'm sitting there kind of going through my messages, and I'm thinking, and I sat there and I thought to myself, what must Curt Cignetti be thinking right now? Like, what must be going through this guy's head? And I talked about this a little bit in that clip that has gotten so much attention from the last podcast, but I think diving into it with Cignetti specifically is worth doing, where you think here's a guy who waited his whole life to get a head coaching job. And because of the way that unfolded over the course of his time at IUP, Elon, James Madison, and then here at Indiana, he develops this almost codex of knowledge about how college football should work. And he gets a chance to come in here. He's scoffed at when he takes the job. The job itself is scoffed at. He makes these bold statements and then he backs them all up. And he becomes the darling. Like, he goes from a guy who was not really on the national radar except amongst real college football sickos in late 2023.
Yeah.
I mean, he went on. They had game day at James Madison, and he kind of got introduced to the national. So people really didn't know who he was,
right?
Unless you really paid attention to college football. He goes from that in what is essentially a 26-month span of time, or a 25-month span of time, to being at the literal top of the game, to piloting a team to the first 16-0 record that we've seen, the first legitimate 16-0 record that we've seen. He wins the 12-team playoff. His team never trails in the whole playoff. He wins the school's first conference title since 1967. He does it with an array of players on his roster that no coach would have independently signed up for. He does it with methodologies that are not, it's not like there's something super secret going on, but they're so simple and straightforward that you've got his own players coming out and saying, there's no secret sauce here. We just work hard and they trust us, is essentially the secret sauce. This is a guy whose entire life's work was just validated in a 26-month span of time. And I can't get my head wrapped around what he must be feeling and thinking internally. And I know he seems like the type of guy who can compartmentalize those things and not let them affect what he's doing on a day-to-day. It's like he made some comment about, if I was smart, I'd retire. But then what would I do? And it made me think about what he must be thinking. Like, what must it be like as a 64-year-old? You've worked your whole life for this. You achieve it. And you achieve it in such a way that nobody can legitimately question what you did. You've got people calling you among the best college coaches in the history of the sport. And think about where you were 2 years ago. Like, it must be just an amazing thing to try to wrap one's head around, to have this level of success this late in your career pathway and essentially have everything that you grew to believe about your job and the way to do your job validated in a winner take all type of scenario, which rarely happens elsewhere in society.
Yes, and I do think this is where we can, as a society, as people, we could just get into the trouble of a counterfactual where it's real easy to look at it and be like, damn, if he would have gotten a shot earlier, if he would have gotten the shot at the age Dan Lanning got it, like imagine how great he would have been. But you said something that I think is key, is that all of those years built up this reservoir of knowledge from different levels of coaching. And yeah, I mean, you give him a shot maybe 7-8 years ago, he's probably still going to do really well because Cignetti obviously can coach. But I think part of it is like, it's not just that he lost 20 years of being a head coach. It's that in that span, he learned so much that allowed him to pass this year's test. All of that knowledge came through. And I think that's also key, that they're, but your point is unbelievably well taken. Like, I think that's a great thought exercise. Like, what is he's probably thinking like right now, like, all right, what about the 2026, 27? He's probably already onto that. But I mean, you are right. People are just like, well, it's him and Saban. Like he's just like vaulted in this other category. And it's funny. I would joke with people year ago or so that, it felt like to me, Cignetti was happy to be here because he knew that if he could win a title at Indiana, that would show that like that's better than any title that's been won over the last 30 or 40 years, because it has nothing to do with anything else. If he goes to Penn State, it's like, well, you have all the recruiting and like Joe Pa and the legacy. It's like any other school on that list of teams that have won since 96. You're going to have some like, well, that's a school that can win titles. And obviously it can. Like doing it at Indiana is just singularly like, this is unique and this shows I'm the best. I would say that. And I can't believe we're actually here where it happened. The other thing with Cignetti that I find interesting is one of the pods I was listening to was talking about his career arc. And I think this is also a really good, Fernando Mendoza has come out with a 10 out of 10, the way he's handled everything, just fantastic stuff. His LinkedIn stuff is amazing. But I also look at the way Cignetti handled his career, I think is also really instructive for people as they look at their career. He was a assistant at Alabama, and he's an offensive guy. Like if he would have gotten a coordinator spot, it would have been an offensive coordinator spot. And you look at the coordinators that were hired at his time at Alabama, I think it was Major Applewhite got a job. There was like a couple guys who were way younger than him, just continually, he was getting hired other people. And then, the story is when he's like, I'm going to, IUP, and Saban's like, are you crazy? And like, to me, the answer, Cignetti obviously had is kind of like, well, then are you going to make me are you going to get me a head coaching job? Like, are you going to make me offensive coordinator? Like, if you're not, and I want to be a head coach, like, then you're crazy, Saban. Like me just sitting here, waiting to be a 55-year-old assistant, the time's going to pass me by. And so I, it's definitely betting on yourself, but it's also just seeing the path of like, I want to do this. And the only path to get there is doing it. And looking back and knowing where he was at, it's like, it actually wasn't as crazy as people think it was, because that was really his only path to get a head coaching job. Like he was just stuck in a spot in Alabama where he wasn't going to get moved up to a point where he was going to be a coordinator, was going to get hired. And the only chance he was going to get it was doing the way he did.
I'll add one thing to what you said a little earlier about him being able to do this at Indiana. So just to be clear, I don't think any coach is going to grade their effectiveness or their methodology's effectiveness based upon where they get the job. So, for instance, Kirby Smart getting the head coaching job at Georgia, I'm sure Kirby Smart is still going to think, well, me winning a title or multiple titles at Georgia illustrates that what I'm doing is top of the line. Like, this is the way it should be done. And I wouldn't question him on that. I don't know in his heart of hearts if Curt Cignetti ever really thought a national championship at Indiana was going to be doable. Now, I also think Cignetti's the kind of guy who's not willing to self-impose any limitations, as he says oftentimes. I will say that I don't know that he would have chosen, if you were, and let's be frank, I don't know that anybody would have chosen to go to Indiana to be the head football coach as their number one choice.
Right.
given the history and given the lack of proof of concept. But I will say that Cignetti doing what he's done at Indiana makes his accomplishments in the historical context so much more valid and so much more impressive than if they had been done at an Alabama or a Georgia or a Penn State, because we've seen it there before. It's, and that is, it's the thing about all of this that resonates the most with historians of the game, which is that whatever the circumstances were that led to this being doable, someone has to do it first. And this whole idea that, well, Indiana did it in an era with the portal and with NIL, it's like, that's true. And those rules are available to the other 135 schools in FBS. They are available to all of the coaches. And for Cignetti to A, have the formula, and B, apply the formula to Indiana University football, the losingest program of all time in FBS when he took over, is one of those things. It's like Henry Ford, inventing the Model T. It's someone had to do it, and you get the rewards of a lifetime of retrospective evaluation of history and people saying that guy was incredible. He had the vision when no one else seemed to have the vision. I don't know if Curt Cignetti thinks about that, but I think it's something that we should think about. And again, it's so great to be in this moment where we can watch this happening and watch it come together, and to have been on the ground observing it almost from the inside. It makes me really excited to see how this narrative plays out, because normally a championship feels like a culmination of a stretch of a lot of years. Like you think about Dabo Swinney at Clemson and how long it took for them to get. We talked about Steve Spurrier. It took him 7 years, but between getting hired and winning a title. Bobby Bowden, it took, I think, 8 years, something like that. Cignetti did it in 2. And yes, perhaps the rules allow that, but I don't know that we will ever look at another period of college football history and see such a fascinatingly quick, effective, and potentially sustainable approach to building a program out of where this program was coming from. That will stand the test of time, I think, as something singular within the history of college football. And for a guy like Cignetti, who clearly respects the game, respects the history of the game, his family's history is in the game, I do wonder if that has resonated with him yet, and how special that must feel.
Agreed. It also goes, and this is just the way sports are, it goes to show just how important, everything culminated with that game against Miami. Because if they lose that game to Miami, again, you and I, like, beginning of the year, it's like, hey, I'll give you a national championship game. Like, done. I would have taken that a million times out of a million. If they lose, all of this is happening because they won that game. If they lose that game, there would be the narrative of like, all right, well, pretty good story, but like they can't get over the, couldn't get over Notre Dame, can't get over the Miami hump. Like there's still something fundamentally you can't do at a program like Indiana. That one game changes everything. And I think about that and I go back to my comments of like, but we're always going to win that game. Like I was watching the highlights of, they did like the game in 60 on Big Ten before the ceremony. And it's like, Fernando's always going to score that touchdown. And that is, to me, that's what, we when we talk about Bob Knight, the stat that I always find interesting is, Lou Henson and Gene Cady, if I'm getting this right, had higher winning percentages in the 80s than Bob Knight. And, variety of differences, not getting into this, but it's like the difference between Gene Cady and Bob Knight is like Bob Knight cashed in titles when he had a chance and Gene Cady didn't. There's a lot of other differences, but it's like Gene Cady was a very good coach. And if you give Gene Cady 2 or 3 titles, his career has looked way differently. And
give him one title, his career looks totally different.
And that's what's so cool here is Cignetti had the moment and he took it and he grabbed it. And now all of the admiration, it's all justified. But it's all there because they won that game in Miami. And that is really a special thing. And now, I don't want to say you're playing with house money, but now you are at a point where if you can stack 1 or 2 more, you got a real case to be like, this is the best coach of, you're right up there with Saban. And there's probably arguments that says you're better.
Well,
You know,
I think it ends up being an eras thing.
yeah,
And, look, Saban was the greatest coach of the the latter stage period of the old model, no question. Just like I think you could make the argument that who was the best coach in the pre-BCS model, and maybe it was Bobby Bowden, given where he brought that program and what he did while he was there. Maybe it was somebody. Maybe it was Jimmy Johnson. I mean, there's some arguments to be made for a couple of different coaches in that mix, and I have not thought fully enough
yeah,
about that. But much like with baseball, we think about eras, and players were great in certain eras, and it's hard to compare the eras and say, well, this player pound for
yeah.
pound was better than this player. That's probably how you have to look at it with coaching. And perhaps Cignetti, perhaps rather than saying, well, gosh, is he, could he potentially be the greatest coach of all time, or is he among the greatest of all time?
He could be the greatest of this time.
And perhaps he's the first great of this era, and I'm sure there
Yeah.
will be others. But there's what he did at Indiana is it's so out of the blue. It has broken the brains of most of the people that follow the sport, and I mean that in the most positive way possible. It has caused everybody to completely reevaluate what they thought college football was and what it would allow, and that is truly the mark of a revolutionary and someone who is a master at what they're doing. And we'll be talking about this for a long time. It's one of the many things we'll talk about throughout the course of the offseason. So.
And I'll wrap up on this. The thing that also is kind of breaking my mind a little bit is, you and I grew up in Indiana, and for the most part, this was a basketball state. I remember when the Pacers were making the playoffs for the first time, and the whole downtown on the, at the time, the Bank One building, like "Go Pacers, go!" And it was a Pacers town. When they won that first series against the Magic, it was like unbelievable. And then, we're not getting into the history of, but things happen. The Palace wasn't awesome, but then you have Peyton Manning come in, and the way that he played was so unique and so fun for players to, for the fans to watch. And you had such sustained success that it really turned the state into a football state, or it really got people fired up about football. And that's what gets me really excited about this. Is it wasn't just that we won a title, which I will take, and that fires up a fan base. But you have all the other ancillary pieces to go along with it. You have the coach who has maybe the most personality in his own way in all of college football. You have Google changing their page for him, with what he said. I mean, like, he is quotable. He's unique. I mean, he is a personality unlike any other in college football. You have the story of all of these players, and then to layer it on top, you have Fernando Mendoza, you win a Heisman. Not only that, he scores a winning touchdown in just an iconic play, and also just has this great story of, like, he's just this kind of aw shucks kid and the LinkedIn stuff. Like, just so many things that I've had so many people within my life who are just, around and not even huge football fans. Just, I love the story of this team and the ripples that's going to have in the state of Indiana. A title is going to resonate, but I just think about that as, like, the way this title happened and the stories behind it, and how, the Fernando song, and just, like, there's so many little things, the towels and, like, the Cignetti logo, like, there's so many things this title run grew out of it, that this is really how you get a seismic shift in fan bases and in support in the state. A title will do it, but when you add all these other ancillary parts that make people lock in different ways, that's what I'm excited about. Is what does the landscape of the state of Indiana look like in 5 or 6 years, and how does this team get there? Because I can say this, and I've said it a bunch of times on our basketball podcast, living in Westfield, it was getting bleak as an IU fan, just seeing gear out, seeing people wearing IU stuff. It was a lot of Purdue up here, a lot of Notre Dame, a ton of Purdue. Everyone's going to Purdue basketball camps and all of that. Like, it in the last week, I've seen more IU gear than I have, most of the time. And everyone's kind of giving the smile and the nod. And it's like, it feels like this run really can change how the state looks at the university, football, and how I'm very excited to see where that goes. But it's like, to me, it wasn't just the title. There's all these little pieces out there that'll, it's like a barnacle that people can it's like it's picking up fans all along the way. It's like, oh, you're not a huge football fan, but do you like kids with great stories? Let me give you Fernando Mendoza. Like, oh, do you like meme stuff? Let me give you Curt Cignetti with like doing the eyeball and the eye test. Like it's wild to me that we have all those pieces with this team.
First of all, people gravitate towards winners, and so it's not surprising. And that's why people are wearing Purdue stuff and going to Purdue camps, because they have been really successful in basketball, far more so than Indiana has the last several years. But and I want to dig into this a lot more in future podcasts. But what's great about a championship run, and especially this championship run, is how many cool little things we will remember if you were there while it was happening. You named some of them, but there's these little cultural things that make you fall in love with those things along the way as everything is progressing. And I'm excited to go back and revisit some of those sometime, because I don't know that we necessarily appreciate them in the moment, but my friends who root for teams that have won titles in recent years, they mention these things a little bit. They don't mean that much to me as a non-fan of those teams, because I wasn't in on not the joke per se, but I wasn't in on the cultural moment. But those are the cultural moments. I think those of us who were here, whether you're in elementary school or in college, or you just graduated, or you've been watching IU football for years, if you were part of it, you'll remember those little bits and pieces as much as you remember the victories down the line. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through the offseason.
And it's also really cool how, so many of these programs have legacies and things that are passed down. Like, Wisconsin has jump around. It's not a great example, but, Penn State has their whiteouts. We make fun of that. But it's like the fact that we added, that's something you and I have always joked about, is like football was just kind of this mishmash of like, we play the first down song and we do the shark thing on third. Like, where did that, I don't know, just everything kind of came from no reason. Like, we added so much over the last 2 years to IU football. It's like, you have the towels, you have the Cignetti logo, you have like the little inside jokes of like, skip class and study later. And, it feels like Hurt So Good is now going to be a song at some point used every game. Like, the fact that we were here and was like there at the inception of what feels like 5 or 6 legacies that are going to go on for the next 100 years of IU football. That is really, really cool.
So much more to talk about this offseason, and we appreciate you folks sticking with us. I told you in that last podcast, we're going to have a lot more content for football. It's going to be coming all offseason. It almost feels like there isn't an offseason. It feels like we've got roster breakdowns, we've got portal edition breakdowns, we've got we've got this much larger conversation about the meta build of college football teams and where Indiana fits within that. We've got stadium discussions. We've got conversations with people that we've had on the podcast this year to hear from them about what their reflections are on the season, on winning the title. There's so much that's coming up. We can't wait to bring it to you. This is an exciting time to be an Indiana football fan, and we couldn't be happier to be here talking about this stuff with you all. And I'll close today by just saying thank you again to all the people that I've seen, whether it was in Miami or in Pasadena or in Atlanta or yesterday at the event. The number of people that have come up, said how much they enjoy the podcast and enjoy the conversations and have really enjoyed this being a central point for fans to be able to come together and talk about this team. It means a ton to Scott. It means a ton to myself. I talked to a couple of player parents last night at dinner, and they expressed that, it's always a shock and also touching when people inside the IU football family say, hey, we like what you guys are doing. And so we can't wait to do more of it. This is normally we put football in the closet for a few months at this point. That ain't happening this year.
I agree.
And there's just so much more to talk about. So we look forward to talking about that with all you folks. But Scott, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
No. The last thing I did, I was thinking this in my mind, but I went back and looked. I have the receipts. I went and saw my season ticket application from 2008. 2 tickets for the entire season plus parking was like $490. Now again, inflation, things have changed, but I was like, man, it goes until like 2014 or 2015 when I paid more for a season than I paid for. I was lucky enough to get tickets through IU as a season ticket holder. for the college football, the national championship, but my tickets face value were $900 a piece. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, damn, I used to pay for an entire season for what one game now cost me, which, by the way, I love it. I'll take it. And it was funny. Like, I found one of mine, like, I think it was a 2011 season or whatever the year we went 1-11. It's like, I see my application. I wrote a check. That's how old, like, I sent a check in. I have a picture of it. And I'm like, man, I remember being so excited to send it in. Like, I just didn't realize what was ahead of me. But I'm going to end everything you echo. I will echo exactly your same thing. Like, it's so nice to hear, our last podcast, we got so many positive comments from it. People just, I think that's what is, everybody wants to keep talking about this because we don't want to let it go, and we don't have to, because it's not going to be let go. I've already had my spending phase on national championship gear. I'm taking a breath. I'm going to put some other stuff together. But just, it warms my heart when I see stuff on Facebook or Twitter where there's like the picture of the Mendoza going across the line. It's like, this is going to be in every sports bar in Indiana, for the next 50 years. And it's like, yep, it is. And I was there, we were all there watching or in person, seeing that moment happen. And yeah, it's awesome. So I appreciate it. And like, let's keep the conversation going. As you said, this is not the end. We will be here. This team deserves it. They deserve having this kind of coverage throughout the offseason.
We'll be back with more of that coverage coming up on CrimsonCast. We'll also have a ton more coming up. Rhett Lewis will be back with the Big Red Carpet. He just did a film breakdown on the whole national championship game. Go to the Big Red Carpet, Substack.com. Be sure to check that out. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is CrimsonCast. We will catch you folks on the flip side as we continue to bask in the glow of Indiana being the national champions. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.